This is a Film Dimension James Bond special. I am here with Jay. We've spoken before. Jay, hello, how are you?
Thanks for having me on again. I'm excited to talk nothing but Bond.
Yeah,
And thanks for having me on earlier and talking about Northwood Pie, my movie. I appreciate you promoting that.
Yeah, no, that's cool. That's cool. And yeah, that's when we started talking about sort of James Bond generally, about sort of films you like, that's influenced you, that has been part of your childhood, that sort of thing. And obviously, when we were talking about that, it was just before the premiere of No Time to Die. And obviously, since then, that has come out in both UK and in the US, and we've both gone to see it. So it made sense to do another chat and kind of talk about all of the James Bonds, really, because yeah, there is 50 years worth of films. There's 25 films, and it is the longest running film franchise ever, so it makes sense to sort of do a special on that. You're a big fan, I'm a big fan, so yeah, why not? So yeah, before we get into it, I suppose, what does James Bond mean to you?
Well, first off, I'll just say how prepared I am for this. I watched every single James Bond movie, all 24, in order, right before No Time to Die's original release before COVID. I was all ready, prepared, and then COVID hit. And then a year and a half went by, and then I watched, I was like, what? Might as well do it again. So me and my girlfriend watched all 24 James Bond movies in order for No Time to Die. So I watched 48 James Bond movies to watch No Time to Die, basically, in build up. And I think it's interesting now talking about it a little bit after it's come out. It's nicer because everyone online rushes and does their review right away, but we've had time to sit on it and think about it and compare it to the rest of the franchise. So I'm excited to talk about it. And what James Bond means to me is, as an American, James Bond has always just been the coolest spy. I mean, that's what I mean. As a kid, you just grow up and I feel like it's like Jaws, like you don't even know where you hear about it, but James Bond is ingrained in culture. Something you're like born with the knowledge of, even here. And it was just, I grew up with the Pierce Brosnan age, and those movies are pure fun. And I had the GoldenEye video game, of course, and I went to see some of those in theaters. And it's always been the pinnacle of cinema in a way for me too, because I like the idea. It's been going for 50 years, and it keeps reinventing itself. No franchises has reinvented itself and also done it in a way that it feels natural. I guess because Bond has done it so much, it feels like it's part of what Bond is. It doesn't just feel like, oh, they're cashing in and they're making another one. And because the same producers and family, I think it feels like something different. And I'm not from the UK, obviously, but I definitely, even here, you feel the sense of family that it has for the people making it. But obviously, like, as a culture, you guys, like, it feels like your guys' movie, if that makes sense. It feels like it's like import to us, and it's like your coolest, most popular import into our culture in a way.
Sure
Besides the fact that we are just based off of you guys, because we came here, but
sure, absolutely. And that brings all sorts of baggage with it as well, more so than, say, Harry Potter does. But yes, I think everyone of a certain age, anywhere in the last 50 years, I grew up watching James Bond on TV. I remember the Roger Moore films as a kid, and then I remember when Timothy Dalton made The Living Daylights, and I went to see that in the cinema when I was very young. I think that was probably my first Bond I actually saw in the cinema. So yeah, it's always been there, and I kind of forgot about the Pierce Brosnan Bonds because I was probably a teenager at the time, and I probably didn't think it was as cool. But for me,
going through that phase where everything's not good, yeah,
exactly, like that. Anything you like as a kid, you don't like when you're like 15 or whatever. So for me, Bond is very much Daniel Craig, because I've seen every single one of those in the cinema, So yes, it's an interesting point that the franchise, the makers, the producers have got themselves in, because at the moment when we're recording this, we don't know who the next Bond is, and there's a lot of debate, a lot of articles I've seen the last week or so, just asking the question, even should there be another Bond? Has it kind of gone on for too long now? Has it kind of lived its life, and now is it time to kind of say that that's enough because of some of the baggage. Bear in mind, of course, like the first film was what 1961, and they're based on books written pre that. So
Mhm.
if you're judging today by any film made in the early 60s, there's going to be quite a lot of different attitudes expressed in the film.
Mhm.
So, and that may be problematic to some people, to many people, and everything else. And that's the thing with film, isn't it? It's there. You can't say, oh no, that didn't happen. You go and watch it, and you're like,
Yeah.
okay. And now perhaps that doesn't play quite as well. So yeah, we could talk about that, the whole Bond thing. I mean, again, we can go into more detail later because this is supposed to be about the actual films as well. But it is just interesting. I did read an article only a few days ago where the person was basically saying, should they get another actor to play James Bond, the character,
Mhm.
or should they keep making films, but the next spy, the next 007 is just that. It's a 007 spy, an agent,
Yeah, it could be
and
anyone.
not James Bond. So anyone could be a 00,
Mhm.
which again, No Time to Die kind of plays with that a bit, doesn't it? But then again, it's like without James Bond, what is it? Is it just another spy film?
Yeah.
I don't know if I know the answer to that, but perhaps we'll find it or attempt to find it in this conversation. So let's start at the beginning. Dr. No.
Yeah.
Can you remember the first time you saw that, and how old were you? And because again, I didn't see it in the chronological order initially, and it does look quite dated.
Yeah.
Now,
Well, it's interesting to see those first early Bond films. I mean, the first one cost $1 million, the second cost 2 million, the third one cost 3, and you can see that evolution throughout. And I think Dr. No feels like the starting point. And when I first saw it, I probably saw it around 19, and I remember I wasn't a fan of it. I mean, I respected it, but I think it was I thought it was boring and just kind of slow. And I was comparing it to other films. I was like, well, some Hitchcock movies are older than that, or North by Northwest is older, and it seems like the cutting of that and the filmmaking is a lot higher quality. But then over the years, having constantly revisited it and watching it in order, I've grown to like it quite a bit, and it's definitely grown on me. And I think it's for what it's done, $1 million, and watching the make and everything. I just think they did a good job establishing and setting up the character. I think the movie actually really works until they get to Crab Key, and then the movie kind of slows down. It's a little long and drawn out, but I think all the Bondisms are there, and I really like the beginning opening with the characters who are singing, and then they end up being assassins. And I just like all the. I mean, the introduction of James Bond is one of the greatest introductions in cinema history for a reason, and that's in Doctor No.
Yeah.
And I think it establishes how cool he is, and you have the classic Bond villain and the layer, and I don't know. I think it sets up the franchise well, and I think it works for what it is.
It's quite a good, almost an origin story, isn't it? It's almost, as I said, it, even though perhaps wasn't quite planned the way it's come out, but it is, yeah, it sets all the groundwork. It does have it. They had the forethought, I guess, because at that point there was more than one book, so perhaps they were thinking we could do all of the books. Yeah, the intro, the Bond, James Bond. Yeah, in reflection, that's quite a good start, isn't it, to introduce a character into a movie. So yes, it's an interesting one, but obviously it's a very important one. The next one, which is From Russia with Love.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's right. I think I've got it right.
You are correct.
Again, you're interested in what you already said. Like the very next film is double the budget. What are your thoughts with that? And it's turning up the Bond thing, the hollowed out volcano, which of course has been, satirized and echoed in
Yeah.
films like Austin Powers and things.
From Russia with Love, I mean, again, it takes the next step, which I really appreciate. And I mean, Sean Connery is so good. I think like each film he gets better throughout up until the third one. And From Russia with Love, the whole setup in the beginning really like instantly grabs me because the first one doesn't do the prologue, the pre-title scene, doesn't go into the big music number after an action scene. So instantly from the moment From Russia with Love starts, it's like, it's a better film. Like there's the shot selection, the suspense, the lighting. I'm instantly more just like grabbed than I feel like I was in Dr. No. And then there's the cheesy, you cut and it's like a different phrase, but they have to rip it off, and it's obviously like someone pretending to be James Bond because they're training, and then that kicks off the big music cue and goes into our first pre-title music. And I don't know, it's pretty, it just gives you a lot more energy. And I mean, there is some points in the film that drag, and there's some gypsy camp stuff, but overall I think it's maybe one of the best James Bond movies. Thoroughly, I mean, it has pretty much everything. I mean, there's a reason when they test James Bond, they use that scene where he walks in and he, points the gun and he's talking about her mouth, and they do that whole gag. But that's the scene they test every James Bond with, and it's because that's kind of like an iconic James Bond tone. It's more like, I think, the epitome of coolness that I think Sean Connery has, and like that 60s sex appeal, and it's the last one. I think it's the most, in a way, that even though it is outlandish with Blofeld and stuff, which is hidden, and I forget her name, but the lady from Austin Powers, with the knife in the shoe at the end.
Oh yes,
but it is the most,
yeah.
But it is the most kind of a spy of the movie. It's not like an action film. A lot of it's on the train. It's a more like espionage like. So I think it's the lower scale factor of it helps, because in the third act, which I do enjoy, it definitely drags on a little long, and it feels like they stuff a lot of action at the end because they didn't have action earlier. But yeah, overall I think I'm trying to think. I think it's my second favorite of the Sean Connery Bonds, behind Goldfinger.
Sure. I mean, it's almost, again, there probably will be some film sort of historians out there that kind of, okay, what are you talking about? There's this, but it's almost feels like that it's a prototype for action films, that this is one of the early films that they might not have used those words or even coached in those terms, but it's the kind of they're running away from something towards something, and it's there's fight scenes and things, but it's not a film noir, it's not a detective show. It almost is a precursor to what would become like action movies, whether they kind of meant it or not. And I mean, the train fight scene is, again, it's very iconic, isn't it? It's kind of, they revisited that again in later Bonds with Roger Moore and Jaws and things.
And of course, even Spectre, like it seems like they reference it quite often.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Then obviously comes Goldfinger, which is, if I was pressed, I would say my favorite Bond. Certainly of the Sean Connery ones, but maybe overall, I think it's, in many ways, it's the most complete Bond. I think as a standalone film, I think it has everything. It has the car with the gadgets that you hadn't seen in the previous two. It's got the villain that is kind of over the top and has a signature sort of way of dispatching people. The laser on the bed with Sean Connery laying there. Again, how many times has that sort of been echoed? The sort of the Bond girls, the sort of the innuendo with Pussy Galore and all that sort of stuff. It what's how does that make you feel, both when you first saw it, and I suppose now, because you could almost start, that's kind of where some people might start referencing as in, well, this is maybe problematic to sort of society norms today,
Well, first off, I think you're right. I think it's like the straight up prototypical Bond. It does everything. It checks every list. And most Bond films since don't quite check everything. They got 80% or 90%, but it's also so great in that everything's wrapped up at the end. You have the perfect Bond villain, as you're saying. You get the Bond lair, you get the gadgets, you get the locations. It still feels kind of lower in scale. You get the car, you get the girls. I mean, you get the structure, you get the pre-title action set piece, which is more extravagant than the last couple, and then you get the best Bond song, possibly, at least the best one up until there. I mean, one of the best, you know.
Yeah.
Goldfinger. I mean, I say that all the time randomly. I just will yell that. But what's interesting as an American watching that, my knock on the movie, and it's a small knock, but the only reason for me that's with a box it doesn't check is it doesn't check the location box, because I'm from America. So like going to like Miami and Kentucky, these places, I'm like, yeah, okay, I see that a lot in movies. Like I want to see other places. So it's an interesting, but I think that's why it broke out so much in America, because the films were always hits. And From Russia with Love to Double Dr. No, but Gold, I keep wanting to say Goldmember because I just watched Austin Powers, but Goldfinger, really, I mean, broke out in America like nothing else. It's like it's one of the highest grossing movies of all time, adjusted. Yeah. And I think it's because they brought Bond to America, and I think that was a genius decision too on the Broccoli's. Like, you know, they don't really talk about it, but they knew setting in America was going to probably up that box office, because outside of the UK, the biggest box office for Bond was America at that time. So it's and that's why they went to Japan later in the fifth movie, because that was the highest like foreign box office outside of those two countries. So but then interesting to talk about the problematic stuff. I mean, there's always some moments of like jokes or something in the first two, but the third one's definitely where it's like he kind of, you know, sleeps with Pussy Galore in the hay, and it's like, I'm not sure how consensual that was. But, you know, I don't judge movies from the past from a modern perspective. You know, I'm able to watch something, you realize when you're watching it, okay, that's what the times were. It makes you just think how far we've come. You know, I just go, okay, that was, you know, you hear people talk about interviews and everyone stands up for it and there's no big deal, but you know, you would never do that today. So it's like, there's no reason to get mad at something. For me personally, it's like, we know it's bad. If people were still doing it today and people were like praising that aspect of it, then I think it's an issue. But you know, the Daniel Craig Bonds didn't do that at all. I think they actually overall treated women very well throughout most of it. I mean, he's still James Bond, he's still suave, he still sleeps with girls, but it's kind of more respectful. And I think all the women are, especially even the Pierce Brosnan ones, like when at least they're all have like, you know, strong characters, I think mostly. Yeah, I think it's kind of, when I watch, I go, that was the 60s, and I guess that's the viewpoint. But again, that's the point of films, I think, especially me growing up and watching old movies. You can kind of see time evolve and what politics and what the thoughts were. Like if you were an alien, you came to America and you wanted to learn history and you couldn't watch a DVD, but I could show you the highest grossing movie every single year for the last 100 years, you would see how our culture has shifted just by watching that and seeing what's acceptable and everything. So again, as long as we keep making progress, which I think we are, that's all that really matters. So if people don't like it for that reason, I get it, but you know, I can ignore it and have fun with the other stuff and just, you know, dismiss it.
And again, it occurred to me years and years ago, but not at the time, because it's like the interesting thing about Bond, and I'm trying to think of another film, maybe say the Avengers films and Marvel films a little bit perhaps, but it's like Bond appeals to children and adults, you know, and I remember watching all the Bonds, the Connery and the Roger Moores as a child, and you don't, or I certainly didn't, you don't understand or appreciate that they're not now. You know, you don't go, oh, this is in the 60s or 70s, you know, because your perception of time isn't as developed. But it none of them felt odd or dated. Do you know what I mean?
It's at the time they came out, they felt relevant.
Yeah, but not even relevant. You could still be watching 15, 20 years later. But as a child watching that, say, Goldfinger, at the time when I was, say, maybe like 8, 9 years old, I didn't think, oh, this looks really old fashioned. It was just you take it that it's made now sort of thing, which is interesting because I don't know, you wouldn't necessarily get that with, say, like a black and white film. And certainly today, I think younger people don't watch black and white films as much. They seem to have an aversion to it. But it's almost like there is elements of, certainly with Goldfinger, there's a timelessness of it, even though it's very much of its time, and you could watch it now and understand that it's a '60s film, but it's still it's a very modern film. It feels modern, just the flow of it, how it's quite
the structure of the movie is almost the same as the structure of most action movies today. I mean, Goldfinger's got the classic action set piece pre-title, and then the end of each act kind of has a major action set piece, and there's little action bits in between, and it kind of goes by, like Indiana Jones, is based off of those James Bond films, and those James Bond films follow the plot that we follow today, where it's like every 12 to 15 pages, every 12 to 15 minutes, you get an action beat, and it's like every other action beat's a major set piece. So it's like you have 15 pages, and then you have a small action scene, then you have 15 pages, and you have a giant action set piece, then you have 15 pages and a small action scene. And I mean, more or less, most movies follow some form of structure like that. I mean, all the way down to the Star Wars movies. So I mean, it's the Avengers movies. I mean, the Marvel movies. I mean, that classic action structure. I mean, I haven't done enough. I mean, I'm sure, like everything, it goes back even further than that. The Bond, I think, is the first worldwide, global, like blockbustery type movie that I can think that touches all countries and all ages, that I think that clearly did that. I mean, Wizard of Oz and stuff, and like storytelling has that classic side, but those aren't per se pure action movies.
Sure. And of course you could say Wizard of Oz or something like that, perhaps Gone with the Wind in a slightly different way. It's that they're still outside of modern day cinema, because they have singing and dancing and that sort of thing, and then they need to hark back to a previous
and they're
time,
not connected to like a running franchise. I mean, because it keeps going, is people will have a reason to keep watching a film from the 60s. Like even if 100 years from now they're still making Bond movies, there's someone who's going to be like, well, I got to watch all of them, and they're going to end up, and it might be the only movie from the 60s they've ever seen at that point, because they have no other reason in their mind to, but it's still there. So I think that, and that goes to like, should we keep going Bond? I think so. I think it encourages people to watch old things. I think the spacing of it, and you should be smart how you do it. But I think it's something that should continue. But,
sure. So after massive success with Goldfinger, obviously Thunderball was next, and
Thunderball.
This another great song, this time with Tom Jones, and this is kind of would obviously come back and haunt the Broccoli production a little bit, with the dispute they had with one of the writers, which created the situation of making the offshoot, the sort of non-Bond that Connery made later on. But Thunderball. What's your thoughts on that?
Thunderball's an interesting one, because Thunderball, you see the confidence in full swing. Like, Goldfinger was the biggest hit ever, and they were like, okay, I guess we're going to make the sequel to the biggest hit ever. And they just dumped so much cash into that movie. And you see it. I mean, it looks the most, like on screen, that movie looks expensive. And it's the first one to shift to widescreen aspect ratio. And it really feels like, and I forget exactly the way, but there's certain lenses and there's certain scenes where they use certain types of film stock. I mean, it's essentially, you can imagine, it's like IMAX for the day. I mean, I imagine going to the theater in 65, I believe, and seeing that and being like, I mean, that projection, I mean, it's massive. And the scope of the whole film is huge. The sets are the biggest. I mean, every single, I mean, even the conversations, like in the other movies, when they go to bars, it's busy. But now when they go to a bar, it's widescreen. There's 100 extras behind them, and they're on the edge of the beach, and there's waves crashing. I mean, it is an epic film in that way. However, I will say, I think it's the boringest of his Bond films. I think that's maybe a poor word, but it just has the most fat on it. I think it drags at times. I think it's a little slow, and I think the plot's a little more convoluted. And I don't think that number 2 is that great of a villain overall. And the ending, while cool, and it's a really impressive imagery, I mean, it goes on for a long time. I mean, that third act in Underwater is like, today's standards, I feel like I would cut half of that out and really tighten the film. I mean, it really goes on and on and on. But I mean, it has sharks, so like,
and has a jetpack.
Exactly. I mean, that's great. But I think overall, it is besides Diamonds Are Forever, my least favorite of the Connery Bonds.
Okay, interesting. After that, again, 2 years after that, You Only Live Twice, which, off the top of my head, I kind of remember this the least of the Connery films. I don't know why it didn't have as much
Mhm.
effect on me as say Goldfinger or Thunderball. Um, I don't know why. Maybe it hasn't been on TV as much,
Mhm.
or whatever. It did. Yeah, it didn't
This is the
affect
one
me.
in Japan, and they have the
Yeah.
volcano layer. They do the little magnet on the car. They drop it in the water.
Mm.
There's like all the little helicopters flying on the like around the volcano.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, he gets in that cool fight in the hotel room against the wrestler guy. He goes to like a sumo match, I think. So it's fun.
Mm.
It has a nice travelogue aspect. I think of all the films, it has that. I don't know.
Mm.
You as an audience are feeling what it feels like to travel the world. Because at that time, I think people don't realize, back in the day, you couldn't just Google and look at stuff and travel and see videos and vlogs and see what it was like to live in other places. Like people had to go to see Bond to be like, what's it like to see this country? And it was
That
sometimes it was the
that
first time they'd ever seen it.
that exactly, that was a large part of the allure of Bond, both for people in the UK and I'm sure for people in the US as well. But yeah, in the mid to late 1960s,
Mhm.
a lot of people wouldn't have traveled to Monte Carlo
Yeah.
or Miami from say Europe or the US, or from the UK, or Switzerland, and you just didn't do that. Certainly, if you were from like a working class background. So yeah, the idea of
Yeah.
seeing these casinos and these speedboats, that sort of thing, it was the only film that showed that. So it was
Hmm.
kind of the epitome of escapism, wasn't it?
Yeah. Something I
It's
have to
interesting.
add. Oh,
Yeah,
no, go.
as I say, it's interesting that now escapism on big budget films is all to do with space. That
Yeah.
you're going to another planet and you're meeting aliens and stuff. But the escapism in say
Hmm.
1967 was you're in a hot climate on the beach.
Yeah. No, it was definitely not as like today. It's more fantasy based. Back then it was more. What else can we see that's left in the world? And if you go back even further, you go back to the 1930s and 1920s. I mean, it's pure adventure cinema, right? It's like unknown regions and the parts of the world that are still undiscovered and not seen, or islands, and so it's that mystery keeps evolving. And now we're in that sci-fi place and that future technology place because that's what we don't know. But I just wanted to mention the directors of all the movies because the first one. The first, second, and fourth have the same director, Terrence
Mm.
Young, and then the third one is Guy Hamilton. So, and then so it's all the Bond directors usually come back. So the guy, the first did the second, the fourth. Guy Hamilton does the third, and he comes back later on. The fifth one we're talking about now, You Only Live Twice. That's Lewis Gilbert, who I just want to throw out. I love Lewis Gilbert. He's maybe one of my favorite Bond directors because I think his other two films he did later on were Spy Who Loved Me and Moonraker. But I like this. I think he gets the outlandish Bond. Like I think the Bond has a scale of it, which we find out is like how outlandish can you go and how serious can you go. And personally, I think he does the big bombastic Bond pretty well, where he just follows the
Yeah,
structure to a T. And he's like, yes, there's girls. Yes, there's cars. Yes, they go underwater. Yes, we're going to space. Yes, there's volcano layers, and he embraces that. I think he makes it work. I think all his films maybe feel the grandest, for better or worse, of all the Bonds.
mm. Mm. So again, following that, there was a bit of a gap. I think there was about 4 or 5 years in between.
There was only 2 years, but all the films before that were only 1 year.
Right, right. But Diamonds Forever, I think, was 1971. The following one from You Only Live Twice.
Yeah, but
Um,
well, that's because of in between 1969 we got Her Majesty's Secret Service,
yes, of course. Yeah. So
which ties very much into No Time to Die.
yeah, yes, it
Kind of.
does,
They
and
play the
it's
music into it a little bit. They use a score.
they do. That's why I thought that was quite interesting because I thought they do tend to do a lot of throwbacks to other Bonds in No Time to Die, more so than perhaps any other Bond film. It's the Aston Martin that they use in The Living Daylights. It's the
Hmm.
same. It's the film score, Wonderful World, and obviously, yeah, he's with his girlfriend, and in Majesty's Secret Service, obviously it's his wife. Um, so I thought that was an interesting sort of nod to the past there, which we could talk about a bit more. But okay, yeah, I mean, we could talk about on Her Majesty's Secret Service because that was a different point. They went. I think hadn't Connery walked away because they weren't offering enough money.
Yeah, he didn't want to do it. He did 5, and he wasn't that
Yeah,
interested in money
he wanted to
dispute.
do
So
other films.
yeah,
And obviously they thought, right, okay, it's a good point now. We could cast another one, and perhaps
George
this is
Lazenby.
yeah, and this is perhaps what they're thinking now, because this is kind of one of their big slip ups, if you like, that they sort of they cast someone perhaps they didn't quite know who he was, sort of thing. Because I remember watching a documentary a while ago about, certainly after he made that film, and his friends and circles he was moving in were basically, he was very much sort of flirting or got involved with a completely different scene, some sort of psychedelic drugs and other people, and basically then sort of saying, why are you being a mouthpiece for sort of the establishment and killing people and that sort of stuff. And I think he took that on board, and thought maybe he didn't want to play this character, and he turned up to the premiere with like long hair and stuff. And of course, James Bond doesn't have long hair, so that didn't work out. Yeah. What's your thoughts of the film?
That one, I go back and forth on that movie. It has some really bold decisions. I love that Bond, gets married. I love it. They kill her at the end. The soundtrack is fantastic. We haven't really mentioned that through all the films. John Barry's score is amazing in every single movie. And he really brings new energy to each one. And the way he's able to incorporate the song of the movie and that musical theme throughout the whole film, so he like overlays it. And each Bond film is a Bond film. It has Bond music, but it has the tint and the theme and the tone of whatever locations they're in and whatever the main song is. And he just does such a great job of doing that. And the 69 film, I think it may be his best score, one of my favorites. I am a little bit, I think the movie's a little long. And I think that the action scenes aren't varied enough. It's a lot of snow stuff, which thankfully we hadn't gotten too much at that point, but they go a little snow happy with Roger Moore. Later on, I feel like he goes skiing just a bit too much. But Diana Riggs is the Bond girl, is one of my favorite Bond girls. I think she's fantastic. But it is a little hokey. I mean, it's like, the plot is like, it's kind of where the fembots come from, it feels like, in Austin Powers. Like they're there and they're basically getting their, like, what do you call it? They're getting their, what's the term? They're going to, like, it's like a cult. So it's like, they're getting brainwashed into this, cult on the mountain. And this is the point where also it's like, okay, now they're changing how, like, Blofeld looks, which I get it, but it's like maybe a stretch too far. Like they probably should have killed him in the last movie. They were playing it out for 5 films, and You Only Live Twice, Blofeld just gets away at the end. You're like, they could have killed him, but then they bring him back, and now it's a different actor, and the next movie's a different actor, and then when they finally get rid of him, it's like kind of half-assed, but oh well.
Yeah, maybe they're sort of experimenting a little bit too much with what they can do. And again, I suppose it's the benefit of hindsight, and perhaps not thinking forward enough, as in like, this is going to continue for another 20 films or 15 films or whatever. It seems the most erratic in some ways, but of course, I don't think it did that well at the box office from memory.
No, it did not do well at the box office, which is why they kind of panicked and they played anything to get him back for Diamonds Are Forever. This one had also a director that was directed by Peter Hunt, who was the editor of the previous 5 movies. And he brings a different style to it. There's a lot faster cuts, a lot more faster pace. The action's really ramped up. So yeah, some of its strengths and weaknesses come from that same point.
Sure, absolutely. Diamonds Are Forever, of course. This is now Connery looking quite a bit older than
people age a lot different in the 60s, man, let me tell you.
I know. Well,
70s hit hard.
Drinking, I guess, but I remember seeing it not that long ago, thinking, oh wow, he looks really old here.
Am I gonna look that much older in 7 years? That's what I'm gonna ask myself.
Yeah, it is. It was crazy. And I think I know, I never say never again, he was wearing a toupee. I think he was in Diamonds Forever as well. I think at that point he had been going bald because obviously we all kind of got used to Sean Connery being bald much later on, 80s and 90s onwards.
Yeah.
But something went wrong with the makeup or whatever, I don't know. But I always remember it being quite a fun film.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, there's that whole kind of mythology about, is there a nod to the fake moon landing in Diamonds Are Forever? Because you've got that scene, which some people say, oh, it's a really odd thing to put in there. That obviously they're putting in there because someone worked on the set, which I'm pretty sure they didn't. But what's your thoughts on Diamonds Are Forever?
I like the pre-title a lot. I mean, even though he looks a lot older, it's got a brutalness to it. It's interesting because again, it's like a sequel to the last movie, which he wasn't in. So it's like, it's almost like when you watch have you seen 22 Jump Street? Like the end, they do all the fake trailers for the movies, and all of a sudden it's like Seth Rogen playing Jonah Hill, and in the next movie they're just pretending like that didn't happen. I mean, that's basically what happens in Diamonds Are Forever. But Diamonds Are Forever is a fun movie. It's interesting because I've been to Vegas a lot. Vegas is really close to Los Angeles and Orange County, so I'm able to, somewhere I've been multiple times growing up. One of the few places in a Bond movie I'd be like, oh, I've been there. Looks a lot different, but it is fun. I like that. I think, is it Jimmy Dean, like the sausage guy's in it? He plays the hotel guy. He's a lot of fun. I think it's nice to see Sean Connery back, even though he's kind of sleepwalking through it. I really do like the guy who plays Blofeld. It's interesting. This is where it gets a little outlandish. He's got like there's two Blofelds are like cloned. He's kind of staying up in his hotel room, which again, rewatching Austin Powers now, I was like, oh, that's kind of like Austin Powers 1. He's in the hotel room. I was like, okay. But I think it's definitely one of the lesser films overall. I do like the Henchmen people. They're kind of like a gay couple, and they're like just really funny and bring a different energy to the Bond movies.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like fun, merciless killers, but it's nice to see someone because in the Bond films they're always just killers. They don't talk. But they like kill people, but then they have a relationship and they have their own little mini conversation. So it's like they're actually characters.
And it's almost like they're having their own joke, and they're in on their own joke, and their own dialogue. And you're right, they're not two-dimensional, just kind of faceless.
There's a guy who picks him up at the airport. I bet he's bad. Yeah, it's a little more than that.
Yeah.
But it's definitely, I think, overall my least favorite of the Sean Connery Bonds. Maybe one of the lesser Bonds overall. I mean, it's still fun. I like James Bond, but definitely one of the lower tier Bond films.
Yeah, it's clunkier, isn't it?
And it is the same director as Goldfinger. He returned and he did this film, and he does the next two as well. He does the first two Roger Moore films, Guy Hamilton.
Yeah. Excuse me. Then, of course, we've got the peculiarity of Never Say Never Again, which is basically Thunderball with a different title.
Not even a Bond movie. Get out of here.
That's the strange thing, isn't it? It came out at the same time as Roger Moore's
Octopus, I believe. Right.
Die. It was the first Roger Moore, wasn't it? Live and Let Die.
No, it comes out way later. It's an 80s movie.
Oh no, sorry, you're right. Yes, you are right. Yes, so yes, Roger Moore had already been established.
Yeah, no, it came out in 83, I believe. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. Yes,
his follow-up to Irving Kushner directed it as his follow-up to Empire Strikes Back.
Which is quite a film to follow.
It is, but let's be real. Empire Strikes Back is much better than Never Say Never.
Yeah, for sure.
Which I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan of that movie. It doesn't feel Bond. It's a weird kind of non-Eon production. I don't know. It's interesting. I've seen it the least.